Okay, here we go. This is the briefing from Military Times for the week of January 10th, 2020. A look at what you missed from the headlines this week while you were checking your messages for deployment orders. Let's get into it. U.S. Iranian tensions ramped up again this week as Iran fired more than a dozen rockets at Iraq bases housing American troops. The Iranians targeted two installations, Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq and another near the city of Erbil. No U.S. or Iraqi casualties were reported, but Al-Assad was damaged. Satellite images showed several damaged or destroyed structures on the base. The following day, President Donald Trump announced new sanctions on Iran and said he would ask NATO to get more involved in Middle East affairs, but said Iran was standing down.
As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime.
For the latest on the aftermath of the attacks, we go to Military Times Pentagon Bureau Chief Megan Myers, reporting from the Pentagon.
President Trump made an address from the White House on Wednesday morning. He was joined on stage by the Secretary of Defense, some of the service chiefs, Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville. The main message from the address was, we are not going to war with Iran right now as such. He announced some economic sanctions that are meant to punish them for their behavior, and he also asked for NATO to step up some of their support. So there's been no announcement of any troop withdrawal or of any major counterstrikes.
The rocket attacks on Tuesday acted as a climax to a week of developments in Iranian tensions. Events escalated last week when the U.S. killed high-profile Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad, and Iranian leaders quickly promised retaliation. Defense Secretary Mark Esper addressed reporters on Tuesday and defended the U.S. action.
Soleimani was a terrorist leader of a U.S.-designated foreign terrorist organization. To somehow suggest that he wasn't a legitimate target, I think, is fanciful. He was clearly on the battlefield. He was conducting, preparing, planning military operations. He was a legitimate target, and his time was due.
In the wake of the killing, officials expected an Iranian response. And for more on how that played out, we go to Military Times managing editor Howard Altman.
After the U.S. drone strike on Iranian Quds Force leader Qasem Soleimani, U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq were hunkered down and waiting for retaliation. That retaliation came Tuesday night, D.C. time, early Wednesday morning, about 1:45 Baghdad time, in the form of a barrage of ballistic missiles fired from Iran. Initially, there was a great deal of concern that there was massive casualties that would engender a massive U.S. retaliatory response. But it soon became clear that there was no U.S. casualties, and it was later learned that the Iranians had warned the Iraqis ahead of time. I talked to some folks inside the Pentagon who felt that this was a hopeful sign that there would be a way to de-escalate. This was the so-called off-ramp.
Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned.
I talked to military leaders that said that this sort of de-escalation could survive even actions by some of Iran's proxies or some of the militias that are out there. You got to remember that one of the things that Soleimani was very effective at was keeping a lid on the Shia militia who had a big role in the fight against ISIS. As it turns out, this was basically a measured response by the Iranians. They took action. They took action that was non-deadly, and they took action that was limited. And it was a way for them to show their own people that they were taking action for the death of Soleimani without making this a worse situation than it was.
In related news, events surrounding the regional unrest also generated some high-level confusion here at home. Let's take a look. Early this week, Pentagon officials were sent scrambling when a letter from official military channels circulated telling the Iraqi government the U.S. was withdrawing from the country. The unsigned letter, addressed from Marine Brigadier General William Seeley, said the U.S. was moving forces out of the country following a request from the Iraqi parliament. Esper and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, were quick to dispute the letter, though, saying it was a draft and a mistake.
We are not leaving Iraq. And a draft unsigned letter does not constitute a policy change, and there is no signed letter to the best of my knowledge. I've asked the question.
And in other misinformation news, the Army had to send a fraud alert after individuals received text messages telling them they had been selected for the draft. The U.S. Army Recruitment Command said the text did not come from them and that there is no draft being instituted. Okay, let's take a break. Following a week of rapid-fire news, here's a little something to soothe you and showcase the talents of some American soldiers. Turn your sound up for this one.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Worth the minute of your day. Good job, guys. And that's all we have time for this week on The Briefing. Check us out at Military Times and Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back next week with more from the newsroom.